And Rebecca will help us with that, with the mute button. If you have any questions, ask Rebecca in the chat box. You can send her a private message. She'll help you out. What I'm learning how to do this online teaching, and one of the things I've learned is that if you write short notes, questions, comments in the chat box, I can usually follow it. Not always, but usually if they're short. If they're long, I usually can't. But I will read them. If you want to put something longer in, everybody else can read it, and I will read it afterwards. And I generally, if I'm in person, I like to have a lot of back and forth. So feel free to send notes, comments along the way, and we'll see how it goes. Well, we've got a birthday. I have to start your 82nd birthday. So happy birthday. Your mother and sister-in-law from Pittsburgh. So is Diane, are you Ellen's mother? Okay, so you're waving. Happy birthday. I think we should say happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to the state of Israel today. And it's a big day of birthdays. We're on the 18th day of the Omer, in the Omer period, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And we're at the beginning of Ramadan. So lots of good energy, spiritual energy out in the world right now. So we'll jump in. The link for if you didn't get it this morning, if you signed up after last night, I didn't send you the link for the materials, but there'll be a link in the chat box if you want to follow along, or just feel free just to listen if you prefer just to listen. So the question is, I was thinking about, we're in the Omer period, which is this period after leaving Egypt and before receiving the 10 Commandments. And it's a very, somebody's not on mute. I'm just gonna get that. Sorry. Okay, 1 second. Here we go. All right. It's a period of uncertainty, and it made me think it parallels what we're going through now. In many ways, the whole world's going through this period of uncertainty and also of hope. Like getting out of Egypt, getting out of slavery in the Bible and the biblical story was a major, wonderful event. And yet, you don't go straight to the promised land. You go through the desert first. And even those first few weeks, we don't even have the Torah yet to guide us on how we should live. And so it's a period of tremendous unknown. And when you read the biblical text, and this is that period we're in, this is the Omer period between Passover and Shavuot. It's 49 days, 50th day is Shavuot. We receive the Torah on that day. At least that's what the holidays represent. And so what does it mean to be in this sort of interim period? And I think it's a question we're all asking right now. What does it mean to be, people are getting vaccines. Some people haven't gotten it, some people have, but if you have, what does it mean to be able to see people again? And if you haven't gotten it, when will I get it? But it's on the horizon. And what will it mean to go back to work in person, if you're going back to work in person, or to be around people, or to, have people to our Shabbat tables, or just at your table at all in our homes. It's a very unsettling time, and it's a very hopeful time at the same time. So I thought this period of time was a great, in the Jewish calendar, is a great time to just say, well, so what was it like for the people of Israel when they left, children of Israel when they left Egypt? And if you read the story closely, it's not a story that's all like everything is all roses and pretty pictures. It's a tough time, and there's wonderful high moments, but there's also some pretty low moments. So we're going to look closely at this period, at least some of the texts in this period. And the first text, I just realized I didn't put numbers on these, so I apologize. So the first text is Exodus 13, that one. This is right after we left. We leave Egypt in a hurry, yes, and right away they're going to be nostalgic for Israel. They're going to be nostalgic. But before that, we're told, we're going to talk about that in a second, Yona. The first thing we're told, though, is that God takes the people, not the shortcut, not the direct route, takes them the long way around. because if you go the direct way, you're going to run upon the Philistines, and there might be a war, and then people are going to want to return to Egypt. And so God, verse 18, God led the people about, the Hebrew is Vayisav Elohim. It's like a roundabout way. It's a way of saying it's like in a roundabout way through the desert by the wilderness of the Red Sea. And Rashi, who is the classic commentator, says, God is aware they might have second thoughts and they want to go back. Even though it's not a good place to go back to, at least you know what it is. At least it's the devil you know, as they say. And I'm going to quote a lot from Aviva Zornberg in her book, The Particulars of Rapture, her book about Exodus. And in this, she's very interesting because she really reads the whole Bible as from a psychoanalysis perspective. And God sort of understands that the subconscious of the Jewish people, of the Israelite people, then they're called. And she comments on this section. So, I'm sorry, somebody is unmuted. I can't see who it is, but if you want to just check, make sure you're muted. So she says, thank you. She says that God's thought process we're given into, as if whatever God means. Okay, and I just want to say, often I say this, I don't know what God means, and this would be a whole other class. But just for this purpose, think of God as a character in the story. Okay, that's and maybe even the subconscious of all of us in this case. She says we're admitted into God's thought process, not going the straight direction. We learn an essential fact: the central importance of the people's desire to return to Egypt, even in the first elation of freedom. But so far, she says, we have no evidence of such a desire. But it's God who speaks of it first, as though it were self-evident. Like, of course, this is what people do. We want to go back to what we know, even if it's not something that was very, very pleasant. We understand here, she says, that the people are ambivalent about the movement to freedom. And it's so interesting. I hear this from people about what's going on right now. We want to go back to life as it is, but we don't want to go back to life as it was. We want, what do we want? What do we want to hold on to? What don't we want to hold on to? There's this subconscious stuff that's going on. And God knows that this is normal. This is what I love. It's normal to want to go back to Egypt, even if Egypt was horrible, because you know every day what to expect. And in the desert, you don't know what to expect every day. And what God wants to do, God doesn't try to keep them from thinking those thoughts. God tries to make it difficult to act on those thoughts. And she says, what God aims to do is prevent the ease of such a return. God cannot prevent them from thinking thoughts, but God can make it harder for them to act on them. And I wonder, and I'm curious about comments on that as we're going forward into whatever the new world is going to be. What are our thoughts? What are we afraid of? What do we want to make sure we don't act on, even though we know we have the potential to act on it in a way that may or not be so healthy for us? I would say for me, I know it would be very easy to keep isolating myself, even though I don't want to isolate myself. How do I ease back into the world? How do I, all of us, how are we going to ease back into the world, and how are we going to deal with, think about what they've just been through in Egypt, the traumas they've been through. It's almost easier to be in the trauma sometimes, because then you don't have to think about what the trauma was. Post-trauma, then you have to actually process the trauma. So not that we wish to be in trauma, God forbid, but post-trauma has its own legitimate and difficult moments. And we should just acknowledge that, and that's normal, and not feel badly about that. Like, oh, things are good now, why aren't I feeling better? Well, because you have a lot to process. All right, so they get out of Egypt. they're going the roundabout way. They end up in front of the Red Sea, or Yam Suf, the Reed Sea, however, whatever, they're at a crossing place and they can't go forward. And then they hear from behind, Pharaoh's army is approaching. And what do they say? And this is, we're in Exodus 14 now. And feel free to make comments. I'm not seeing anybody writing anything. So if you have things to say, feel free. We can comment along the way, or there's lots more here. When Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they were very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. This is common. They're constantly crying out. And they said to Moses, what, there were no graves in Egypt that you have to take us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt this way with us, to bring us out of Egypt? Why did you take us out of Egypt? We're going to die here. We should have just stayed there. Isn't this what we told you when we were in Egypt? We said, leave us alone so we can serve the Egyptians. It was better to serve the Egyptians and die than to die in the wilderness. Of course, they did not say that, but this is in retrospect what they said. And they're like children, understandably, like, why did you take me here? And Moses, what does Moses say to the people? Don't be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which the Lord will work for you today. For where you're seeing the Egyptians today, you will not see them anymore. And the Lord will fight for you, and you will be silent. He tells them to be quiet. And then the Lord says to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Speak to the children of Israel that they go forward. Lift up your rod, stretch out your hand over the sea, divide it, and the children of Israel shall go into the midst of the sea on dry land. It's interesting. They cry out to God. Then they turn to Moses and they say, like, why did you bring us here? Then Moses says, don't be afraid. Everything's going to be fine. Be quiet. And then God says to Moses, why are you crying out to me? I don't see any place here where Moses is crying out to God. And this has struck me for years. People cry to Moses. Moses tells the people to be quiet. And then God says to Moses, get moving. What are you crying out to me for? And it's like, what is Moses's role? Like, who is Moses here in terms of our time today? Like, when am I Moses? When am I telling these guys to be quiet? But in fact, what I'm really doing is like panicking inside and being, and I'm really, actually, I need to be reassured. Well, I'm reassuring these people over here. And God said, just get moving. This isn't a time for prayer. This isn't a time for talking. You are the leader, get going. I'm seeing a lot of comments here, so I'm gonna, before I talk more, actually, I see a private comment, the particulars of rapture by Zornberg. Maybe somebody could write that in the chat who's familiar with the book, just so everybody has that. Sorry, I should have had that ready to go. Ellen says, people often prefer the bad unknown thing than the unknown thing with the potential for good. Right, and that's us right now, isn't it? In so many ways. Kathy, it's leaving an abusive relationship. There's risks, absolutely. There's reasons why people don't leave difficult situations. Abusive relationships, it is not always obvious that it's the best thing to do to leave. It could be more dangerous when you leave than staying. And that's what I definitely have learned that from the counselors at JFS who work in this area. You don't recommend to somebody in an abusive relationship, well, why don't you just leave? You need to really think about what's the danger when you leave? Is it going to be worse than the danger of where you're starting from? And how do you set up a situation where you're going to be safe? And here, these children of Israel, they're just going out into the desert, no preparation, and they have to learn to trust God. So what do we need to learn to trust? Who do we need to learn to trust? Is there, we don't have a magical God that comes down and takes care of us right now, but we have each other. who amongst who amongst us can we trust? Who are our friends? Who are our, who do we need to reach out to so that we can all feel safe? And everybody needs, there is nobody, even Moses has to reach out. Even Moses has to reach out. Moses can't do this by himself. And if you think it's just Moses, remember, it's Moses, it's Miriam, it's Aaron. There's the 70 elders. Moses doesn't do this by himself, even with God's help. Everybody needs help. And Moses makes his fatal mistake, by the way, in the book of Numbers, right after his sister Miriam dies. It's the very next thing. And I have often felt that Miriam is that underappreciated third. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, the three siblings. Miriam was the quiet one, but because we don't really know a whole lot about her, but it may be that she was the behind the scene person who held everybody together. I don't know, but I do know that every great leader has people behind the scenes who are holding them together. Everyone, no one does this alone. Margaret, triangles are difficult. Yeah, right. And Moses is in the middle of this triangle. And we might think about when we're in that position and when we are the one that everybody's turning to. Or think about the person that we all turn to, in different families or communities, who's supporting them. Think about that. Yona writes, Moses is interceding. It's like Fauci. Interesting. Okay. There's a lot of parallels. We might disagree on what they are, but it's interesting to think about it. Lainey, I think Moses is saying the Lord will act while you are silent. That is, your cries won't influence the situation. Oh, interesting. So like sometimes the cries will, so that's an interesting question. Like, when is it appropriate to cry out? And when is it appropriate? It's like, no one's listening. So, okay, what do I need to do? I think sometimes when we're in a traumatic situation, we don't know, we just do. But when we're, there are the right times to cry out, right? And so that's a really interesting question. And like, how do we discern? Yona, he's been a flashpoint for real news, fake news, anger and hope. All right, that we're talking about Fauci. Yeah. And Moses certainly gets in that position a lot. The transition is unknown, Tracy writes, yes. And that the unknown is frightening to human beings. Yona, trusting ourselves to be able to handle the transition with the support of loved ones and Hashem. Right, and how do we, I think that's what this whole class is about. Finding our place where we're going to trust, who we're going to trust, how we're going to trust, and trust ourselves for those for whom God is a source of trust. Can we turn to prayer just as a way to ground ourselves? But also, how can we turn to each other? Beth, fine, I understand the desire to silence fear, but I don't think it helps us find courage. Right. Thank you, Beth. I think that's striking to me, because Moses telling them to be quiet, it really doesn't feel like it's a very sensitive answer to a real fear. And God telling Moses to be quiet. Like, what is it about quiet? This makes me think right now about when I was giving birth to our first daughter, and I was like screaming. And the doctor said to me, you might want to hold on to that energy and just put it into your body instead of yelling. And you can channel that energy in a different way. And it was actually quite, it was good advice. It helped. So like, when do we cry out? When do we channel it in different ways? I think this is a really good question. And I, by the way, I'm not one of those people who thinks that whatever's in the Torah is like, this is telling you what you should do. I think sometimes it's telling us what you shouldn't do. So we have to discern, which is which. Tracy, it's hard to reach out when your family and friends have different beliefs about COVID safety, and what they're willing and not to do. It's hard to seek comfort from that. Right, so then who can we reach out to? Right, that's the question. Who can we reach out to? There's always people we can reach out to, even if it doesn't feel like there is. Sometimes it's because a lot of times we've been burned, so we just stop turning and looking. So the question is who and how. He's trying to instill strength in them so they don't fall apart and give up. That could also be like, listen, this is not the time for crying. We got to act. We can cry later, right? That could be what's going on. JB, I don't know, JB, do you go by JB? Jody, great, hi. Maybe Moses just needed the quiet to think, like how people turn down the radio when they are driving. It's raining hard. It helps you see better when you have quiet. Right, and actually, interesting, that's a perfect transition into the next quote from Aviva Zornberg, which is, why is Moses supposed to stop praying, and why does Moses tell the people to be silent? And she says, perhaps the emphasis on silence as the people enter the Red Sea is a necessary part of the perception of the miracle. Like, when we're yelling, we can't see sometimes what's right in front of us. And sometimes we need to just like get quiet, look around, and an answer will be in front of us. When I'm in panic, there's all this scientific knowledge we know about our brains. When our brains are excited, we can't think. The thinking part of our brain turns off because we're in save ourselves mode. And so in this case, maybe we needed to get quiet to be able to walk into the sea, to get ourselves together and to walk into the sea. And that's the next thing that happens. Solomon writes, before I read the next thing, sometimes there's a difference between individuals and groups. Groups crying out can increase the panic rather than decrease it. Interesting, right? It can feed off itself. Thank you, Solomon. Right. So Moses is trying to quiet a crowd that could be getting out of control, as opposed to an individual that comes. That's an interesting, important distinction. Thank you. All right, so here we go. What happens next is they go into the sea on dry land. And of course, if you've studied these texts before, you've seen this. But if you haven't, I want to just point out, how can you be in the midst of the sea and also on dry land, right? And so the rabbinic interpretation is that they walked into the sea. There's some that say it was Nachshon, one individual who walked in. Others, I actually saw one that said it was a woman. I don't know if that was a modern interpretation, or actually I'm still been looking for it, but whatever it is, somebody had to walk in first. And they walked in all the way up to their nose. And at that point it split. Like, there's something about making something happen by walking into the sea, and then it's the dry land. And the waters formed a wall for them on their right and on their left. And that's verse 22. What happens in the verses that I didn't give you, and you can go online and find, if you don't have a Bible, you can go online and read all the details of it. I think this is just a remarkable story. But the Egyptians come in after them, and they're drowned. The Israelites go through, the Egyptians drown. And then we get to verse 29, the Israelites had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, the waters forming a wall from them on their right and on their left. And this is how the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. And by the way, the Hebrew is not Egyptians, it's Egypt. I've never seen a translation that does this, but all of wherever it says Egyptians in this part, it's actually the Hebrew is Egypt. They see Egypt coming after them. They see Egypt dead on the side of the shore of the sea. And we'll talk about that in a second. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, or actually the Hebrew says Egypt, the people feared the Lord, and they had faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. There is an interpretation in the sort of the more mystical readings of these, that this is all about an internal experience. And Egypt represents that thing that scares any one of us. And you see Egypt coming, you see that narrow thing coming, that literally Mitzrayim means a narrow place. Egypt is in me. And when I see it coming, I get scared. And this going through the sea is like a birthing experience of like escaping that Egypt. And what's dead on the side of the sea is that Egypt inside of me. That's what I need to rid myself of, is that Egypt inside of me. Of course, it's going to come up again, and it's not going to go away forever. But to see it sort of on the side, away, I've conquered it. I've conquered my fear, whatever that is, whatever that Egypt is for me. Pharaoh too. Pharaoh is represents stubbornness inside of us, right? It doesn't have to be external, although it can be. It can also be external, but it can also be read internally. And this whole experience of crossing the sea is this facing a fear, walking into it, and getting across to the other side, and seeing that I've been able to leave my fears behind, dead, as it were, on this side of the seashore. It's a very different read. And whenever I have a real problem with some of these texts, I try to read metaphorically, and it just opens it up for me. If Egypt becomes the place, my own fears, if death of the firstborn is the firstborn of my Egyptian, if the death of the firstborn Egyptian is the death of the beginnings of my fears, of what oppresses me internally, it's just a whole different story. If the hardening of Pharaoh's heart becomes Pharaoh, those stubbornness inside of me that gets hardened and I can't get out of. And so it's not the only way to read it, and it doesn't solve all the problems that these texts have, but it is one way to think about. Yonah, the only way out is through, right? And I think that's what this story is telling us. The only way out is through. And you got to walk into the water until it's up to your nose sometimes, and pray to God that it somehow force that water to split. And then the people follow. I found this really kind of struck me interpretation. Mei HaShiloach is a Hasidic commentary. The Hasidic commentaries are usually more mystical. The early Hasidic masters they're more likely to read Egypt as internal, right? They're more likely to read a lot of this stuff very metaphorically and very about the inner life, right? And so he says, one who truly fears God, commenting on this section, has strength and confidence in God. And again, I'm aware that people have different understandings of what the word God means. So I would just say of something bigger than ourselves, just to make it sort of as universal as possible right now. This is the meaning of the two texts. Notice here, when they first go in, verse 22, they walk into the midst of the sea on dry land. But afterwards, the description is they walked on dry land in the midst of the sea. The order is reversed. I'd never noticed that before. I've probably read this text 100 times. I've never noticed that the order changes. And he says, the sea symbolizes fear and prayer, and the dry land indicates strength and confidence. For one must connect the two. A person must connect the two, must connect both fear and confidence. The two have to come together, fear and confidence. So at the beginning, the midst of the sea is the fear. They walked into the fear, through the fear, and then they got their confidence. And then at the end, they could say the confidence came first before the fear. And here we are, a year plus into this pandemic. We've got fear and confidence, sort of the dry land and the sea, right? We're holding on to both of them at the same time. And we're trying to figure out what each of them means. What comes first? What does it mean to walk into the sea right now? What is the sea? What is, when's the right time to walk into the sea? How do we create the dry land? And then what do they do once they're in the water? Right? There's so many great midrashim interpretations that as they're walking through the sea, there's food. There's pictures, there's stories of like there's what's it, like fruit trees, as it were, like the mothers could pluck an apple and give it to their kid. Like anything you needed was in there, and you could walk across. Like metaphorically, what does that mean? The idea that once you're in there, you have everything you need. You just have to look to the right or to the left. Sometimes, though, we don't look to the right or to the left. We're just looking, sometimes we're just looking at our feet. But what if we look this way and that way, and we see these amazing other human beings doing amazing things and helping each other out? I mean, that's been the whole year. We can tell the story of this past year of a lot of terrible things, or we could also tell, I mean, that's true. And we can also look around. We could tell the story this past year of all the people who made food for other people, the frontline workers. I mean, what's the story? What do we get? Which way are we going to look? According to this midrash, people looked this way and that, and they took care of each other. They fed each other. The kids got fed. And then what do? They get to the other side, and it's unclear. Those of you who know the text, there's this is the chapter. The next chapter is the Song of the Sea, one of the most beautiful songs that the children of Israel sing when they get to the other side. But there are some midrashim that they didn't wait till the other side. They sang as they crossed the sea. And I like that better, because that's like the singing is where it says Az Yashir, then Moses and the children of Israel sang. When's the then? And I didn't bring all the different texts, but there is certainly an interpretation that they got quiet. They, took a deep breath and they walked into it. And as they were crossing, instead of shouting, they began to sing. And when you sing with a group of people, which is something that we miss tremendously right now, there's an energy that lifts us and carries us. And you don't have to have a good voice, because if you got enough people with a good voice, it carries the whole group, right? And so I can sing along. I mean, you don't want me leading it, but I know I can sing along. And you need my voice too, because that just makes the sort of the cacophony work, the energy work. I've been thinking a lot about the power of song over this last year. I was just saying to my husband last night, remember when those first videos came out where somebody figured out how to make a bunch of different boxes all sing at the same time? Somebody figured that out early on, and we would listen to those and just weep. They were so beautiful. And now, I don't know how to do it, but like a lot of people know how to do this now, apparently. It's like you see there's tons of these things coming out, and they're still beautiful, because it's that desire that we have to have our voices joined together. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about what's the difference between before they went into the sea, they're yelling, but the redemption comes through singing. And I think about what singing represents. If you've ever been to a rally where people are yelling, it's kind of scary. And for me, it's kind of scary. The energy of a crowd that's yelling, chanting is frightening for me. The energy of a crowd that's singing, I'll stay there all day. And something different happens. And if you think about the civil rights movement and the role that song played in that civil rights movement, it had to be song. It had to be song. Song is love. Song can come from a place of love. Chanting can rarely come from a place of love. It comes from a different, I mean, people who know more about music can talk to this, but I'm going to guess it comes from a different place in our body. So I just, Aviva Zornberg, I just had to bring this quote in here. I see Stuart wrote mana. Tell me why you wrote that, because I think you might have put that up there in response to something I said earlier. So write another note so I know what I'm responding to and what the mana was responding to. Because we'll talk about that in a minute. The mana comes after we cross the sea, by the way. It's going to come next. We'll talk about that next week. But tell me what you wanted to say about that. All right, so Aviva Zornberg writes, The dialectic proposed here emerges into song, and the dialectic of, and she's commenting on the Mei HaShiloach about fear versus confidence. This fear and confidence come together into a song. It is while in the suspense of anxiety, a suspense and anxiety of crossing, that Moses suddenly finds it in his heart to sing. The meeting of terror and joy, destruction and birth, takes people beyond the normal places of speech. It takes them, we have suggested, first into silence. Moses silences the people's cries, God silences Moses' cries, and the awe-inspiring mystery that is the entry into the sea, the tearing apart of the sea, the birth of fearful energies held in tension as Israel crosses, this reduces the people to speechlessness. And it is from the heart of that silence that Moses conceives of a song. What is uncontainable and inexpressible, he puts into words that are written in the Torah. That's all of chapter 15 of Exodus. And we have Miriam also in chapter 15 of a song that she sang as well with the women. What remains, and this is what I want to kind of end with and talk about a little bit, what remains unwritten, of course, is the melody that gives voice to the mystery. Right? We know they sang. They went from crying to silence, walking into the sea, song. But what was the melody? And does it matter? And so what's our melody? And yeah, Yona, I definitely was thinking about that trope. Trope is the musical notes that we sing the Torah with. This makes me think, gosh, about 10 years ago, my husband and I were in sabbatical. Second day of Rosh Hashanah. Gosh, I haven't told the story in ages, but it makes me think of this right now. Second day of Rosh Hashanah, we were in, some of you might have heard of this paper clips project for the, in a really small town, Whitwell, Tennessee, I believe was what the city, where a teacher taught, there's no Jews in the school, no Jews anywhere near this place, about the Holocaust, trying to teach these students about like what happens when people don't take care of each other, when people demonize other people. And she trying to figure out what 6 million means. And they ended up collecting 6 million paper clips to get a sense of just like, what is 6 million? Anyway, we were visiting there. The only day they were open, that around the time when we were there, was second day Rosh Hashanah. Never not been to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, but it was like many ways to worship. We went there. And they have this little museum, a Jewish museum there. Whitwell, Tennessee, that's where it is. And in this, it was an amazing thing, because like, usually these museums are run by Jews. Like, there's nobody Jewish there. And there was a Torah. And I'm like, I can't believe it's Rosh Hashanah and there's a Torah. And long story short, they'd never like seen the inside of this Torah. So I opened the Torah and I showed them what the Torah was. And I opened and I said, you know, you want me to read the Torah? You can hear what it sounds like. And they're like, yeah, you know, they were just like, the whole thing was amazing. And of course, you know, I don't know the trope, but I knew the Hebrew and I could fake the trope. And I started singing the trope, the musical notes. You know, you can fake these things if you know what you're doing. And they're all going, why'd you sing? It's like, well, because when I said I'm going to read the Torah, they expect me to read the Torah. But if those of you who've been to synagogue and heard Torah reading, you know, you don't just read the words, you sing the words. And we talked about what is it? And I was like, they all go to church. I was like, well, why do you sing in church? And it's like, well, it tells the story. It makes you feel better. I mean, all the things that we know about music. And so that's why we sing the Torah. When we say read, we mean sing. And there's different tropes. You know, Sephardim will have a different trope than Ashkenazim, and different Ashkenazic tropes. I've heard that this particular Shirat Hayam, this particular song, sung in many different ways. There's different traditions about how to sing it, and each one has its own, I don't know, power. And each one is right. Each one is right. And when I talked to those kids in Whitwell, Tennessee, and first there was a group of white kids, then there was a group of Black kids. I did it twice. And they both said the same thing about the power of music in their churches. Everyone knows the power of music, why we sing. There's something about the fact that they sang, that we have different traditions about the melody, and we get to choose which melodies, we're gonna, I don't know about you, there's certain musics that I listen to when I want to evoke certain emotions. When I know I need to enter into certain emotions and I've been avoiding those emotions, there's certain music that'll take me there. I just do it. I'm just reading Yona's comment. Interestingly, there was a reading of Israeli Declaration of Independence in trope, right? Trope is, again, the musical notes that we use to read Torah at the Western Wall in Hebrew by 18 different rabbis last Sunday, many different tropes. Metaphor, we are all having our own song, our own experience of walking through the sea according to our own tunes. Yeah, thank you. Right, sometimes we expect everybody to have like our tune, or we're disappointed other people have a different tune. But in fact, we have different tunes. Question is, are we singing? And what does that mean? And do we have people to sing with? Again, this is metaphorical, but it's also literal. And Tracy, to your point earlier, like what if, who do we reach out to? You can't reach out to your family. People have differences. Are there other people who do sing your melody? And can we find them? I want to just repeat what I said earlier. Nobody can do this alone. What we're going to be going through in the next few, what we've been through in the last year, what we're going through in the coming months, it's like, it's what's always been true. You can't get through life by yourself. You just can't. And, we're searching for communal strength. That's one of the reasons we're having these classes. It's one of the reasons JFS exists. And actually, Rebecca, if you want to just drop into the chat box, just the information about JFS resources. I mean, there's JFS may or may not be the right place for everybody. That's fine, but we do also, we refer people out. You can call us, and if you can tell us, like, listen, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. I live in this area. Can you help? JFS. I don't want to come to JFS, or I do want to come to JFS. Whatever you want, we can also help refer out. That's also part of what we do, if that is more comfortable for you. But everybody needs help along the way, everybody. And the people of Israel, what's I think really powerful about this experience of walking through the desert, that's different. I think Moses seeing the burning bush, that was an individual experience. This experience of being in the desert, that's a communal experience. And so each individual in the community has their own personal experience, absolutely. And we're experiencing something as a community. And so holding both of those things and respecting the individual experiences and also holding the communal experience. Like I said, that's one of the reasons we're having these classes. So we can talk about this together and acknowledge that we're going through something together and that we can hold each other along the way. Sometimes it's just as simple as like plugging into a class and just like seeing other faces. I know for me, every time I see everybody's faces, I'm like, well, yeah, we're all still out here. And some of these faces I know, and some are new faces. I appreciate, both. Like, oh yeah, there are new people I'm going to meet one day, or I'm meeting you now on some level. And on that note, also, I just want to comment, if anybody is new and I don't know you, feel free to send me an email and just tell me, a paragraph about who you are, just so we can say hi. I promise to write you back. And even if I do, feel free to write too. So I'm going to wrap us up because we got 1 minute left. I'm going to remind us that we're meeting next week, same time on Thursday. Then we're going to have a week off. And then we're going to come back for 2 weeks on Wednesdays at 11, not 12. Okay, just so there's a time difference. We're trying not to conflict with other things happening in the community. So 1 more week on Thursday, week off, and then 2 weeks on Wednesdays. You can come to any I'm going to put my email here. You can come to as many as you want, as few as you want, whatever. If you're already on the list, you'll get the emails with the recordings. I'm going to put my at jfsseattle.org. I think that's my email address. All right. Thank you, everybody. I left some questions for further thought and a quote for further thought as well, and I welcome your thoughts. Thank you, everybody. It's really, really wonderful to see you. Have a good week, and happy Yom Ha'atzmaut. Happy Israel Independence Day.